Good evening and welcome to Al24 News. I'm Abdurrahim Kashur and these are today's top stories. The US has warned the Russian invasion of Ukraine would be horrific of both sides, while calling for a diplomatic solution as tensions over Moscow's military buildup on the border of the country continued to simmer. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has suspended Burkina Faso in the aftermath of the military coup, making it the third member nation to be punished for the military takeover in only 18 months. The trial of 6 men accused of stealing 18th century jewels from German museum has begun in Dresden amid tight security and questions over whether the treasures will ever be recovered. Scientists can now gather and analyze DNA extracted from the thin air, known also as environmental DNA, which could transform how endangered animals and natural habitats are studied and protected. Hello again and welcome to Al24 World News. Russia has built up its military presence along its borderline with Ukraine. An estimated 100,000 soldiers are concentrated along the border, with some 20,000 reportedly located near the Donetsk and Luhansk republics. A few days ago, over 8,500 NATO troops were kept on standby in America if the security situation in Europe deteriorates further or if NATO activates its response force. 35,000 Russian personnel are permanently stationed near Ukraine territory, or let me say stationed near Ukraine territory. Fighter jets and ships have been accelerated by NATO allies who have put forces on standby to bolster Europe's eastern defense as tensions soar over Russia's military buildup near Ukraine. Russia has built up army units that could be used in the ground invasion, such as the 8th Guards, which oversee the pro-Russian, or let me say the pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. There is also the 1st Guards tank army, which has been modernized as well in the recent years. Ukraine believes 127,000 Russian troops may be amassed along the border. Russia has also sent fighter jets and air defense systems to the western Belarus for combat readiness checks and military drills. Amid growing fears of Russian invasion of Ukraine in the Western countries, President of the United States Joe Biden announced the plans to send smaller troops of U.S. forces to Eastern Europe in the near term, while the Pentagon has put 8,500 troops on heightened alert for potential deployment to NATO countries in Eastern Europe. Nabil Khassini.
The Russian troop buildup on Russia's border with Ukraine seems to raise concerns in the United States and in other Western nations. The US President Joe Biden said Friday he plans to send a small number of US forces to Eastern Europe in the near term, amid growing fears of a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine.
I'll be moving US troops to Eastern Europe and the NATO countries in the near term. Not a lot. Thank you.
Biden's comments come hours after the top US military general warned the Russian invasion of Ukraine would be horrific for the country. He urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to choose a diplomatic path instead.
Given the type of forces that are arrayed, the ground maneuver forces, the artillery, the ballistic missiles, the air forces, all of it packaged together, if that was unleashed on Ukraine, it would be significant, very significant, and it would result in a significant amount of casualties.
While the US put 10 of its Air Force bases on high alert, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he did not see a greater threat now than during a similar massing of troops last spring.
Today we do not see more escalation than it was before. Yes, the number of troops has increased, but I spoke about this at the beginning of 2021, when we talked about the military exercises of Russia.
In a call with Macron lasting longer than an hour, Putin said the US and NATO had not taken into account Moscow's fundamental concerns about the expansion of NATO and deployment of strike missiles near the Russian border.
333!
Fears in the West about a potential invasion of Moscow to Kiev were reassured by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who made it clear that Russia does not want war with its neighbor Ukraine.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky called on the West to avoid creating panic in the face of Russian troops collection on his country's border. The president also said that statements about the escalation of the situation with Russian cause panic in the financial markets as well negatively affect the economy.
The feeling is from the media is that we are at war. Troops are walking along the roads. Mobilization people are going somewhere. This is not true. We do not need this panic.
Within the same story, Russia sees no positive reaction from the US on Moscow's main security demands. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said, adding that President Vladimir Putin would decide on our next steps. West African main regional bloc, the ECOWAS, has suspended Burkina Faso from its governing bodies just days after the army has taken over the country's rule. Islam Sidon, what follow?
The West African regional bloc ECOWAS has suspended Burkina Faso as a result of military coup, which forced the elected President Roch Kabore to resign. Burkina Faso is the third member to be sanctioned for a military seizure in a year and a half after suspending Guinea and Mali, where coups have been conducted. The military takeover announced on TV by the army, who claimed that Kabore failed to stop violence in the country, which resulted thousands of deaths during his ruling period. The suspension act came after a 3-hour virtual meeting held by West African leaders to discuss Burkina Faso's file. The ECOWAS leaders also called for Kabore and all the imprisoned leaders to be released. Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, Ghana's president and the present ECOWAS chairman, described the recent sequence of coups in West African countries as a direct violation of the democratic tenets.
The resurgence of coups d'etats in our region is in direct violation of our democratic tenets and represents a threat to peace, security, and stability in West Africa. This situation hinders the much-needed economic and social development of the region. I've convened this meeting with the hope to address the urgent situation in Burkina Faso and find solutions that will restore constitutional order to Burkina Faso and stabilize the region at large. We should not renege in our collective duties and obligations to ensure a peaceful, democratic, just, stable, and prosperous community. I urge you to examine critically this rising phenomenon in our region so that we take the necessary decisions that meet the aspirations and expectations of our peoples.
The bloc has already delivered a statement condemning the coup and accusing the military of forcing Kabore to quit under threat, intimidation, and pressure. It's worth mentioning that ECOWAS suspended Mali after a coup there in 2020 and then subsequently did the same in Guinea after the president was overthrown.
Thousands of people have been displaced from their homes in the Democratic Republic of Congo as a result of fighting between the army and the M23 rebel organization. An army aggression near Retorsho, north of Goma, was attacked on Tuesday. The M23, one of more than 120 armed groups fighting in eastern DRC, is commonly thought to be backed by Rwanda. A powerful winter storm is expected to produce conditions in the United States. According to the National Weather Service, heavy snow and strong winds were forecast to be in as part of the Carolina and Appalachia. The local officials rushed to declare snow emergencies and impose parking bans, warning wind-blown snow could make travel nearly impossible and colder temperature could mean dangerous wind chills after the storm passes. Scientists can now gather and analyze DNA extracted from thin air, known also as environmental DNA, which could transform how endangered animals and natural habitats are studied and protected. Islam Seed has more to be clarified.
by gathering samples in Copenhagen Zoo in Denmark and Hamilton Zoo Park in the United Kingdom. Two groups of researchers, including Dr. Elizabeth Clare and Christine Bowman, tested whether airborne DNA could be used to detect different animal species.
We can track DNA from various animals by filtrating the air, so we could track animals. It's firstly important in order to study different species. Secondly, we are in the midst of biodiversity crisis, and if we want to keep track of all different species out there and where they might be in decline, then we need efficient methods to do so to map their prevalence.
When living species leave waste, bleed, or shed skin or fur behind, they release genetic material known as environmental DNA or eDNA. Conservation biologists have recently sequenced waterborne eDNA to follow some species in aquatic habitats. Monitoring airborne eDNA, on the other hand, proved more difficult due to the fact that it is thinner in air than in water. According to UK study lead author Elizabeth Clare, the team working at the Hamilton Zoo Park was able to identify DNA from 25 different species of animals, including tigers, lemurs, and dingoes.
Actual experiment we conducted was to look at whether or not within a zoo environment where the animals are confined, we know where they are spatially, but also we know exactly what they are, whether we could recover that measure of biodiversity. So could we sample species in an area and then match what we found to what we know was supposed to be on site.
Despite the fact that the two research teams employed different ways to filter DNA from the air, both were effective in identifying the animals lurking close, both inside and outside the zoo.
More than 7,000 trucks of Bolivians and Argentinians are still waiting to cross into Chile through Paso Los Libertadores. They spent days and weeks waiting for the mandatory test against the COVID-19 test coronavirus, and they are still waiting since now. More with Nabil Khazini.
The picture is like this at the Chilean border with Argentina. Around 3,000 lorries remain stuck at Cristo Redentor border crossing in Mendoza, in Argentina. Drivers are asked to get tested at the border, in addition to provide a negative PCR test to enter the country. The backlog at the border is feared to increase, as a resolution to the situation has yet to be found.
I am loaded with soybeans, so it really rains. The loads get wet. The soybeans get wet, so it's a little risky.
Lorry drivers from across Latin America, including Argentina, Bolivia, and Brazil, are waiting for the Chilean authorities to find a way to increase testing capacities in order to increase the influx of vehicles. According to data from the Department of International Transport of the Federation, each day a truck is detained at the border represents an extra cost of $700 every day.
The port was empty. There are no trucks for imports. Why? Because we are all here.
The conflict began on January 14, when Chile decided to add one more requirement to approve the passage of cargo transport. Since then, the country began to carry out coronavirus tests on each carrier. Neighboring nations, including Bolivia and Argentina, have reportedly offered support to Chile in processing the required tests.
In Africa, child ethnic tensions rights groups blame security forces and Central American migrants. 10 suspect people smuggler arrested. And more international news with Marwab Al-Iwar on this paper.
14 protesters have been killed amid ethnic tensions in eastern Chad, while rights groups said some had died in clashes with the security forces. Residents of the capital Wadai province protested against plans to integrate a top official who comes from the Arab community in locations traditionally reserved for the Sultan of the local Wadaian community. A government official, speaking in condition of anonymity, said there were 14 dead and 64 wounded among the demonstrators, but refused to say who was responsible for the casualties. At least 4 people were killed and 10 others injured in a roadside explosion in Pakistan's restive Balochistan province. The blast took place when people were passing through Mat area of Dera Bukti district in vehicle. Police said at least 4 people died in the blast while 10 others were injured. Senator Sarfaz Bukti, who hails from the area, confirmed the attack and said one of his relatives was among those killed in the blast. He said the banned Baloch Republican Army was responsible for the blast. A new report finds that Western economic measures imposed on Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover are preventing aid agencies from moving funds into and within the country, blocking millions from receiving emergency relief. The report published by the Norwegian Refugee Council shows that it will be impossible to reach millions of people who need assistance unless the US Treasury and other donor agencies take immediate actions to enable banks to facilitate humanitarian financial transfers and support the Afghan Central Bank to resume its key functions. 10 people were arrested after Guatemala coordinated with the US Department of Homeland Security in raids against migrant smugglers. Guatemalan officials said it carried out 19 raids against a migrant smuggling group that led to the arrest of 8 men and 2 women, according to a national police spokesperson. The group is known for smuggling Guatemalan migrants to Mexico, a dangerous journey that ended last year with the massacre of 19 people. In Canada, a convoy of anti-vaccine truckers and their supporters is heading to the country's capital, Ottawa. The convoy was formed as a response to a vaccine mandate requiring Canadian truckers to be fully vaccinated against the coronavirus in order to cross the borders between Canada and its neighboring country to the United States. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau expressed his concern about the potential of the violence during this weekend's planned protest on Parliament Hill by truckers and others joining the crowd to express their anger about public health restrictions to combat COVID-19.
The Omicron strain has mutated slightly into a new iteration, becoming the leading source of infection in some parts of the world. International health officials have indicated that scientists are tracking a new iteration of the Omicron variant known as BA2 or stealth Omicron. Some international health officials have indicated that scientists are tracking this new iteration. This new variant is propelling COVID-19 spread in Europe and Asia. It's unclear currently if stealth Omicron leads to a certain subset of COVID-19 symptoms over others, but top health officials are stressing to keep an eye out for all 11 potential side effects that we have been aware of. Argentine President Alberto Fernandez unveiled what he called a reasonable new debt repayment deal with the International Monetary Fund on Friday. The day of $700 million repayment was due.
After 2 years of negotiations, Argentina reached a $44.5 billion agreement with the International Monetary Fund in an effort to stabilize the economy and refinance an existing loan with the international institution. The South American country would have had to return $19 billion this year, $20 billion in the following year, and $4 billion in 2024 under the old agreement. In addition to the payment made on Friday, another $370 million was due on Tuesday. The center-left administration has frequently said that the repayment schedule was unsustainable due to a shortage of reserves, and it was attempting to reform it.
In comparison with previous agreements signed by Argentina. And it's good to remember this. This agreement does not contemplate restrictions that would delay our development.
However, the country is stuck in an economic catastrophe with inflation over 50% and poverty at 40%. Fernandez stressed that the agreement would not compel the government to cut public spending and would instead allow it to enhance investment in public works. According to Economy Minister Martin Guzman, Argentina has pledged to gradually decrease in its budget deficit from 3% in 2021 to 0.9% in 2024 under the new agreement.
For the year 2022, we project a primary fiscal deficit of 2.5% of the gross domestic product. And for the 2023, that variable will be 1.9%. And for 2024, 0.9%.
Taking into account Argentina's attempt to curb inflation, which has surpassed 50%, the new loan will assist the country in avoiding a worsening economic catastrophe.
Coming back to Europe, fearing political chaos, Italy's warring parties were set Saturday to beg outgoing President Sergio Mattarella to stay for another term due to a possible failure to elect his successor. Mattarella won nearly 400 votes, and the parties in the governing coalition said they had struck a deal to elect him. At the next round, Italy's presidency is largely ceremonial, but the head of the state wields serious power during political crises, from dissolving parliament to picking a new prime ministers and denying mandates to fragile coalitions. 6 German men accused of involvement in 2019 jewel heists at a museum housing one of Europe's greatest collections appeared in court in Dresden on Friday, with the whereabouts of the treasures still a mystery. What follow?
The trial of 6 men accused of involvement in stealing one of the biggest jewel thefts in modern German history got underway in Dresden amid tight security and questions over whether the treasures will ever be recovered. Prosecutors have alleged that the men were responsible for the November 2019 heist at Dresden's Green Vault Museum, stealing treasures worth $129 million. Police said the robbers set fire to a power distribution box near the Green Vault Museum to plunge the area into darkness. They then cut through iron bars to gain entry to the display room, security camera footage showed.
A total of 21 jewels were stolen during the robbery, belonging to 3 different diamond or jewels sets dating from time of August the Strong, and estimated to be worth over 113 million euros.
The defendants, who are brothers and cousins aged between 23 and 28, will be tried in juvenile court, in which they appeared in handcuffs and holding large folders in front of their faces, while having slung jackets over their heads to avoid being photographed, as 2 of them were legal minors at the time of the heist. The trial involved 14 defense lawyers from across Germany, 3 prosecutors, and representatives of the juvenile court because of the age of 2 of the defendants, twin brothers, at the time of the crime, is expected to continue at least until the end of October.
This is all what we have gathered for today's news. Our 24 news program is still rolling, so stay tuned for further updates. Have a blessed evening. Bye-bye.